Where did the country we call Canada come from? Canada was born because treaties were made between First Nations peoples, Ontario, Ottawa, and the Crown. These treaties are legal documents meant to share all resources and bounties of this land between the settlers and all our nations. These treaties were negotiated in good faith by our peoples. However, Canada used the treaties to control and diminish First Nations. There are many truths that need to be told in Canada. The truth about the treaties and the colonial, racist laws and policies developed in this country need to be heard in order for Canada to move forward. Anishinaabe Nation wants to tell you about how the treaties have affected our peoples from inception to this very day. This is not an easy story, but it is a necessary one. We share this knowledge in order to inform, educate, and teach how all our nations can move forward in a good way.
My name is Derek Fox. I'm the Grand Chief of Anishinaabe Nation. Anishinaabe Nation is an advocacy organization. It was created back in the mid to late 1970s in an effort to advocate, lobby, and support the many First Nations of Anishinaabe Nation. The NAN territory is vast. It extends from the Manitoba border to the James Bay coast and the Hudson Bay coast. Out of the 49 First Nations, 32 are remote. All the communities are extremely diverse, unique in their own way. The display was created after the Seven Youth Inquest here in Thunder Bay, which took place between the years 2000 and 2011. We had high school students come out to Thunder Bay who were pursuing their education and unfortunately lost their lives. You know, we had many people look into it and why this was happening and to ensure that it wouldn't happen again. This display was created to show people that Canada has not lived up to the treaties, and unfortunately to this day that treaty agreement between First Nations people and the non-First Nations people has been one-sided.
So, how did Canada get into this mess in the first place? A mess of misunderstandings about who our peoples are and where we come from. A series of colonial laws and racist policies were created by the Canadian government to make sure our peoples abided by the treaties. The Indian Act was created in 1876. The goal of the act was to assimilate First Nations peoples and make them good British subjects. The act was meant to erase our language and ways of life. Here are some things you might not know about the Indian Act. It denied women's status. It introduced residential schools, a system that took away nearly 150,000 of our children from their families and put them in church-run, government-funded schools. Thousands of our children never came home. The Act created reserves. It gave Indigenous peoples European names. It made it illegal for us to practice our ceremonies, and it denied us the right to vote until 1960. The effects of the Indian Act impact us to this very day. The Act has caused confusion about who we are and where we come from. We'd like to talk to you about some of those myths.
Not paying taxes is one of the biggest myths that are out there in this country. It might be one of the driving forces of racism towards our people. You know, me as a First Nations person here in Thunder Bay does pay taxes. I pay property taxes. I pay all the taxes that non-Native people will pay.
My name is Bobby Narcisse. I'm Deputy Grand Chief of Anishinaabe Nation. Another myth is that Indigenous people get free education. As education is our treaty right, the federal government has not provided equitable funding for our elementary and high school students. So when our students graduate from high school, they don't even get enough funding or tuition money to go to post-secondary education.
The trauma and the residential schools is extremely powerful. It's been something that, from a personal standpoint, that I've lived with. You know, I've had both my parents attend residential school, And the reality is that my generation have lived through this trauma. They've all experienced being raised by parents who were not ready to be parents. You know, what do you expect by people who've been raised in the residential school system? You know, they're taught to hate their own language. They're taught to hate their brown skin. They're taught to hate their long hair. They're taught to hate everything about themselves. So you can imagine the upbringing that many of us had, and that legacy of residential school that has lived on through generations that exist today. There's a lot of work to do amongst our people, amongst each other, but there's also a lot of work to do in this country. There's a lot of work to do from both levels of government. They have an obligation and a duty to ensure that they live up to that reconciliation that they often talk about. There's a huge lack of action from the government. I'm hopeful that someday in the future the non-Native people of Canada can understand how and why our people have ended up in the places that they may be. And one of the biggest reasons for that is the broken treaties, that need for that fair relationship. So we're hopeful that one day people get to learn this. And we're even more hopeful that one day the government of Canada, Ontario, and our provinces do live up to their treaties, their treaty promises, their treaty agreements, working together as one, so all of our children and grandchildren could benefit from this land.